Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. What faith stresses the oneness of humankind and prescribes laws of personal morality and behavior as well as social laws and principles to establish the oneness of humanity? You might be surprised. My guests know the answer. They are Connie and Floyd Donnelly of Greater Gilbertsville, and they are members of the Baha'i faith. Not exactly a common denomination in these parts. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
How did you all get involved in the Baha'i faith, which I think it is safe to say there aren't a whole lot of Baha'i folk in this neck of the woods?
Western Kentucky does not have a lot of Baha'is compared to other religions, but we have them in Murray, in Paducah, out in Gilbertsville, Callaway County, various places around. The biggest concentrations you would find in probably Louisville or Frankfort or Lexington. Mm-hmm. The way that I became involved in the faith is I started dating this girl that had these ideas that I began to wonder about, because I had just come out of the military and we had been just drilled about the communist cells that were all around, and they sounded good till you got in them, and then you found out, and I just knew these people were into something. They didn't know what they were into. But the more that I looked at it, the more that I determined, I believe this is true. And that wasn't these people were being duped. I was the one that thought that I was so worldly, and I didn't know what was going on in the world that I thought I knew about.
And this person you're referring to was?
My wife, my current wife.
I suspicion that.
That was my first wife after 50-some years, and she's still my first wife.
Well, congratulations. Of course, Donnelly, that's an Irish name.
Yes.
Were you reared Roman Catholic?
No.
Okay.
I was reared Protestant.
The orange of Ireland.
Oh, the other Scots Irish.
Yes, the other Irish. My father tells of when my great-grandfather came over, that they had found some other people from Ireland that were, just about a 4-hour buggy ride away, and they invited them over, and they had meals. Then they went to the parlor and looked around, and there was the wrong people in a picture on the wall, and they just got up and left and never came back.
Well, then, how did you get involved in the Baha'i faith? You were reared what?
Baha'i.
You were reared a Baha'i. Your
Yes,
family.
My parents are Baha'i, and they grew up in the Quincy, Illinois area. I then became a Baha'i, but you really don't become a Baha'i until you can be raised that. But we have independent investigation of truth. That's a very important part of our upbringing. My parents became Baha'i when I was maybe 8 or so. But I remember having people in our home, we called them firesides, and we'd just talk about different aspects of the faith. When I was 3 years old, this was happening. So.
Well, tell us a little bit about the history of the faith. It's not as old, obviously, as Judaism or Christianity or Islam. Tell us about the history, how it got started.
Okay. First of all, we believe in one creator, known by many different names, revealing, unfolding religion, so that to one human family of many different colors. We are working to establish peace. And when this beginning of this endeavor was really quite strong was when Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, was imprisoned by the Muslim clergy. He was becoming too much of a charismatic leader.
Was he Muslim originally?
Yeah, like Christ was a Jew.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Exactly.
And so he lived in which country?
Persia.
He was in
Iran.
All right. Okay.
Yes. And he wrote letters to the kings and rulers and religious rulers of the world at that time.
And this was in the 19th century?
1800, in the 1800s,
Mm-hmm.
yes. 1863 to about 1868. He'd been in prison for a long time, a total of 40 years before he passed away. But Floyd will tell you something about those letters he wrote to the kings and rulers of the world at that time.
Mm-hmm.
The Baha'i faith is about 150 years old. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, was born in the early 1800s and died in 1892 or 93. So, yes, our religion is not nearly as old as Judaism and Christianity, although it is probably the most widespread religion in the world beneath Christianity at this time. It's in more areas of the world. Baha'u'llah, while in prison, received a message from God that he was to be the mouthpiece for God for that day. And consequently, most of his writings, of which there are hundreds of books that he has written, letters that he has written, etc., were written as a prisoner. It seemed like every time he became a prisoner, pretty soon his guards and then the whole people around him, sometimes when he had been banished from one place to another one because he became too much of a threat, because everybody around him started to like him and started to follow him, so that he'd get banished to another place. And he had been being banished from one place to another, to where some places even the governors of the state and the city mayors and so forth became followers of him, and he kept, and they would take him, and his family was along with him most of the time. They were all banished. And the major that was in charge of taking him from place to place also became a follower of him. So it was a threat to the clergy at that time. But the later years, after he had been to Adrianople and Baghdad, etc., he finally was banished to the prison city of Akka in Israel. And that was where he spent the last 40-some years of his life, was in that area. The people at that time that were put there were the worst of the worst of murderers, etc. And he and his family came in, and pretty soon they realized that he and his family were not part of what normally had been sent there. And so they finally put him and his family in a house, and he was under house arrest type of thing, where he could not leave, but his family could. None of them could leave the city for a long time. Then finally it got to where they could leave the city, etc. So that's kind of, but most of the time he was either under house arrest or in a jail cell when he was doing this writing. Now, in the 1850s, he wrote to all of the 1860s, he wrote to all of the religious leaders of the world, the Pope, many of the people in the Muslim religion, as well as the heads of state all over the world, from the Americas to the Queen of England to Russia, etc., for the Tsar there. And he explained to them that God would make them productive, and if they would only be just to the people that they are empowered over top of, not to be there to tax them and live gloriously on the backs of their servants or on the backs of their people, but to treat them justly. Well, you can imagine what the religious leaders and what the heads of state, like Napoleon III, said at that time to some guy that's in jail, and he's telling me how to run my country and that God would want me to do this for my people. So consequently, they did not follow him. Now, Napoleon, when he got the message, he said, if this guy is from God, I'm two gods. And it wasn't too long until his kingdom, his reign ended. And most of the people did a similar thing. But Queen Victoria read it and said, if this is of God, it will survive. And if it doesn't, it won't hurt anything, because they were only preaching peace and unity among all mankind and trying to unite the whole world into one civilization. Well, it has survived for at least 150 some years now.
60-some.
So I don't know whether you can say that's proof that she was right or not, but we are still individually trying to promote peace in the world. We have no clergy, so consequently it's individuals that discover on themselves what they think is the truth. There is only one truth. Truth is truth, whether it's scientific truth or religious truth. If it's true, it's true. And we believe in the independent investigation of truth by the individuals, so that people will then look into things on their own. And we feel that the world today is literate enough that they do not have to have a minister or clergy to read and interpret for them what they read, that people now are, so that they can read and understand in most of the world.
Most religions have sacred texts. Is there a sacred text of the Baha'i faith?
It has, our sacred text is plural. He has written many books. Anything Baha'u'llah writes is authoritative, or the Bab, his forerunner, or indeed his son, Abdul Baha, means servant of the glory. Abdul, what he writes. And then there is also the center of the covenant. We have this covenant that interprets, if it's necessary, from Arabic and Persian. It is necessary for many of us, and they do the translating. But there is now it's a universal house of justice that keeps the unity of the faith. So the covenant is very, very important and very strong in the Baha'i faith. And we do not, as Floyd mentioned, have clergy. Part of this is we look upon humankind from the beginning as like infants, and then the childhood stage. We're in the tumultuous stage of adolescence. We don't need to go into much about why of that. Right. And we're verging on maturity. And this maturity, of course, one needs to be independent and understand, because we're made so differently. We have so many different interests in even our physical makeup and our biological makeup, and all kinds of things are different, but we're one human family. And with this diversity comes a big picture, growing wider and wider. And this is very important, because we're all creatures of God, and we're all one family. So this is something that, when you read the text of Baha'u'llah, the sacred text is from Baha'u'llah, and there's no one Bible. We have gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah, many books that we have in print now that have been translated. And also then the authority is passed down through this covenant. And so we have a way to stay unified.
Trying to grasp this.
Sure.
The one thing I thought was very interesting is how God spoke to him. That's very similar, it seems to me, to Muhammad and the angel Gabriel speaking to him. Obviously, ecumenism is a very big part of what you all believe in. And there are some churches are more ecumenical than others, as we know. But I guess what I'm having a hard time figuring out is, now I was reared Presbyterian. It's a very hierarchical church. Most churches are. So how do you all? Well, I mean, what holds this together? I guess
We have
as an institution.
we have a governing body. Maybe I should say more governing bodies. Locally, if there are 9 Baha'is in a local community, they are elected to run the affairs of that community. And the affairs of that community may be who's going to teach children's classes or who's going to do this kind of thing, whatever it may be. Do marriage ceremonies, etc., and funerals. Then there is a national body of 9 that are elected from each region. Now, Kentucky, the state of Kentucky is a region unto its own based on population, and consequently it has 1 delegate that goes to elect the National Spiritual Assembly.
And that meets, what, once a year?
Yes, they meet once a year and elect them. The National Spiritual Assembly then, all the National Spiritual Assemblies of all the countries in the world elect a universal House of Justice, we call it. And sooner or later, each of these will be probably houses of justice. In Iran, where the Baha'i faith started,
Each of these local assemblies.
will be.
Mm-hmm.
They got to where they were starting to function as houses of justice, as the court system there was not filling in where it needed to be. And people knew that were not Baha'i even, they could come to this house of justice of the Baha'is and they got justice. Where if they went to their local courts, they may not get justice. It depended on if whoever they were fighting against knew the judge or whatever was the way it was determined. But they knew that they could get a just decision from the Baha'is.
Mm-hmm.
As you talked about the hierarchy of churches or of denominations, we have basically not that hierarchy, but a group. And we really believe that if the group goes back to the Word and understands the question that's being asked, goes back to the Word and applies that, that's much more likely to, or unlikely to see. The group, the Baha'i group, as a consultative body, is more likely to get to the truth. Hierarchical things are, as we can see today, quite corrupt in many, many, many ways. And we believe, as we're on the edge of this maturity that was talked about, that we as a group, especially with guidance from the books we have, that the decisions, it really empowers people more. And it makes us realize that if this world is going to change into a peaceful world, it's got to change quickly.
Again, in listening to what you all are saying, your faith sounds almost deistic in that there is a creator.
Right.
But of course, in the deist faith, the deistic view is God the clockmaker. You're familiar with
yes,
that. Is Baha'i somewhat like that? In other words, once God created this wonderful universe, then He left humans to fish or cut bait, so to speak.
We don't have that feeling. We think that God is an unknowable essence who created the world, yes. This unknowable essence, we can't know God. We can know what He tells us through these manifestations or divine physicians or spiritual teachers sounds degraded, but we do have the personalized God because we know God by His characteristics: love, compassion, asks us to be honorable, truthful, loyal, have mercy, show justice in a group. We can show. We're supposed to show mercy to to each other, but not take on justice by wielding.
And of course, those are principles of most religions.
Why, of course.
Now, obviously, there's a great difference between practice and principle oftentimes. But again, so ethics is the root of this. Your faith is ethics.
I think that would be,
It's also mysticism.
yeah, also mysticism. But it's as with all religions, there is a code of ethics that goes with it, which is similar. God has not really changed much from Christianity as far as the ethics are concerned.
Well, every faith has something like the Christian golden rule
Of course.
with
Right.
manifestations. That's pretty basic stuff.
It all comes from God, and this we seem to have to repeat those ethical teachings. We fall away, something gets between us and God. Therefore, we think that the renewal of this manifestation of God, through whom God speaks, whether it's Buddha or Christ, or it's the Word of God, and that this now, because the condition we are, we're not really exactly one world in that we can't study this. I'm talking to a history person. We can't study world civilization, I don't think. I think we study the histories of various countries in the world, but so far we don't have that governing body that says, yes, we are all human beings and we all have certain needs. In the future, we believe we will.
Well, obviously, a big part of religion is nationalism.
Absolutely.
And that is,
Sad.
yeah, well,
Pardon me.
One of the things
yeah.
the Baha'is believe is that before we can unite the world, we must eliminate all kinds of prejudice. Now, prejudice we think of is racial prejudice here in the United States, but there's sexual prejudice, there is national prejudice, there's religious prejudice, there are all kinds of different prejudices. We must eliminate those prejudices before we can unite the world.
well, and going back to nationalism, eventually nationalism replaces religion as the main cause of European wars. And while oceans of blood have been shed in the name of religion, oceans of blood have also been shed in the name of nationalism. Going through some more things here, if I may look at some of this, high moral principles, trustworthiness, chastity, and honesty. That's a tenet of the faith. I particularly enjoyed this one over here on the other page, was avoidance of excessive materialism, partisan politics, backbiting, alcohol, drugs, and gambling. So no social drinking as a Baha'i?
Correct.
Correct.
I think of drinking as imbibing liquid, but
Right. Obviously, this is alcoholic beverage.
Right.
So abstinence, teetotaling
Yes, sir.
is
Yes,
that's
yes.
interesting. And of course, backbiting. That's.
Ooh.
I think we would all. I think surely all religions would agree we shouldn't do that, but we do that. It's that sort of thing. So partisan politics. I mean, you all vote, don't you?
We do vote, but we have a unique method of voting for this local spiritual assembly or national spiritual assembly. Right here where we hear all of this stuff on the television today about who to vote for, and we have no electioneering. No one is elected because of what they said on TV or whatever.
But no, what I was getting at, you all Baha'is do vote in elections.
We do vote
for president and senator. And,
Yes.
oh, yeah.
We do that, but we do not vote in the primaries because you have to declare
a party.
a party.
So you all Baha'is typically register as independents.
In Kentucky, if you register as an independent, they put you in a party,
An independent party.
an independent party. So it's a very strange little entity.
So again, partisan politics, you eschew that. No
That's
partisan.
exactly
Well,
right.
another thing too, a lot of religions, a lot of Christians are evangelical. Are you all evangelical? Do you go out and sort of recruit? Do you have revivals, in other words?
No.
I didn't think so. Well, Presbyterians don't either. I don't think anybody would come anyway. So
We
that's
try
more
to
of a Baptist
refresh
thing.
our understanding of the spiritual things, but and we do it in a group sometimes in conferences. But no, we're not.
Not knocking on doors or,
Well, we sometimes
yeah.
do that, but it isn't a proselytizing kind of thing, trading off this for that.
Well, of course, we discussed before the program went on, the computers and this. Do you all, there is a Baha'i website, obviously, that's where I found this. Does that bring in members?
Yes.
Yes, it does. It's amazing the number of people that just find on their own here in Kentucky. We've had a couple just recently that in central Kentucky that called the National Spiritual Assembly and said, I want to be a Baha'i. How do I do it? Because they have read enough stuff either online or that they have gone to their libraries and found Baha'i books and have read and decided, yes, this is true.
I have had 2 Baha'i students down through the years. It's been a while. But again, I marvel at the internet and who reads this stuff. I mean, obscure websites you think nobody looks at, well, they do. They must surf the net. We are rapidly running out of time. In the time we have left, could you all give us a contact phone number? If someone watching this program was interested in the Baha'i faith, how could they get in touch with you all, or whoever is the contact person?
There are several.
In Paducah, we have a 270-415-0664. If they want to be anonymous, there is a national spiritual number that they can call and leave a message and receive some literature. It's a 1-800-22 and the word UNITE, U-N-I-T-E.
Very good.
1-800-222-UNI.
22 UNITE.
22.
I always find those numbers difficult because it's like U, N.
Yeah.
You know. But
Yeah,
everyone-
where are they?
They're easy to remember, but they're kind of hard to punch in, at least
Yeah,
for
I
me.
think so.
In any event. Thank you all for coming. I enjoyed
very
this very
welcome.
much. My guests today were Connie and Floyd Donnelly of Greater Gilbertsville of the Baha'i Faith. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.